I didn't want to believe it at first. The late nights, the sudden need for space, the way Mia's eyes always seemed distant, as if her body was present but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The woman I married, beautiful, kind, and full of life, was drifting away from me. The signs were there. I'd seen them in a dozen failed marriages of friends and family. That gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach telling me something was wrong. And yet, I tried to ignore it. Until I couldn't. That night, I sat on the couch in our dark living room, my laptop open, pretending to work on a project. I could hear Mia moving around upstairs, getting ready to meet some old friends for dinner. It had become a routine. Once a week, sometimes twice, she'd leave for hours and come home late, always smelling of perfume that wasn't hers and clothes that felt too fancy for a casual dinner. I wasn't working, though. I was waiting. My phone buzzed next to me, the notification I'd been waiting for finally appearing on the screen. The cameras I'd installed a few days earlier had recorded something. I felt a twinge of guilt as I grabbed my phone and opened the app, spying on my own wife. But what choice did I have? She wasn't telling me the truth, and I needed to know what was really going on. The first few videos showed nothing out of the ordinary, just Mia in the kitchen, making coffee, or sitting in the living room reading a book. But then, the footage from the night before. I clicked play. There she was, standing in the hallway near the front door, her phone in hand. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she was afraid of being caught. I paused the video, studying her face, looking for answers. Was she meeting someone? Was this the evidence I'd been dreading? I hit play again. Mia lifted her phone to her ear and began whispering into it, her words too quiet for the camera to pick up. Then, she did something that sent a chill down my spine. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black package, handing it over to a man I couldn't quite make out in the shadows by the front door. He was tall, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, and from what I could see, their interaction was brief. A few murmured words, the exchange of the package, and then he was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. What the hell was that? Drugs? Some kind of black market deal? It wasn't an affair, but this was something much worse than I expected. I watched the footage 3 more times, trying to piece together what I had just seen. But no matter how many times I watched, it didn't make sense. Why would Mia be involved in something like this? What could she possibly be doing that required such secrecy? I closed the laptop, the gears in my mind spinning. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could ignore anymore. My wife was hiding something dangerous, and I needed to know what it was. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Mia had already left by the time I woke up, her side of the bed cold and empty. She was always up early these days, gone before I even had a chance to ask where she was going. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for her to text me. She didn't. I spent most of the day pretending to work, my mind racing with possibilities. I thought about calling her, asking her what she was doing last night, who the man was, what was in that package. But I knew she wouldn't tell me the truth. She hadn't told me the truth in months. Instead, I waited. I checked the camera footage from time to time, but there was nothing new. Just Mia coming home late again, looking as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. By the time she got home that evening, I was sitting on the couch, trying to stay calm, trying to figure out how to bring it up. She walked in, gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I used to love those eyes, bright, full of life, but now they seemed clouded, distant, like she was keeping a part of herself hidden. "Hey," I said, watching her as she kicked off her shoes and headed toward the kitchen. "Hey," she responded, barely glancing at me. "How was dinner?" I asked, hoping to sound casual. "It was fine," she said, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "Just catching up with the girls." I watched her closely, trying to find any crack in her facade. But Mia was good at this. Too good. I didn't know when she had become such a skilled liar, but it made my skin crawl. I wanted to ask about the man, the package, the late-night phone calls, but I didn't, not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I stood up and walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her close. She stiffened at first, but then relaxed, leaning into me. For a moment, it felt like old times, like we were still us. But then she pulled away, her smile fading. "I'm really tired," she said, brushing a hand through her hair. "I think I'm just going to go to bed early." I nodded, watching her disappear upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. The next few days passed in a blur of suspicion and surveillance. Mia continued her strange behavior, leaving the house at odd hours, coming home late, always on edge. I checked the cameras obsessively, but there was nothing significant. No more men in the shadows, no more mysterious packages, just Mia, going about her life, hiding whatever it was she didn't want me to see. I started following her, not in a creepy stalker kind of way. I just wanted to know where she was going. I needed answers. One night, I followed her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. My heart pounded as I watched her walk inside, disappearing into the shadows. I parked my car a few blocks away and approached the building, keeping my distance. Through the cracks in the building's worn-down walls, I could see Mia meeting with a group of people. They were gathered in a circle, talking in hushed tones, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. I strained to hear their conversation, but it was impossible. All I could do was watch. After what felt like hours, Mia finally emerged, looking more tense than ever. I ducked behind a nearby dumpster, my heart racing as she walked by, oblivious to my presence. Once she was gone, I crept closer to the warehouse, my curiosity getting the better of me. I found a piece of paper taped to the inside of the door. It had a symbol on it, a circle with 3 lines intersecting at the center like a spider's web. Beneath it were the words, "The Collective." The next day, I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind kept circling back to the night before. The Collective, the strange meeting in the warehouse, Mia's tense expression as she walked out. It didn't make sense. Mia had always been so normal. She was an interior designer, for God's sake. The kind of person who loved cozy spaces and soft colors, not covert meetings in abandoned buildings with activists planning God knows what. But the facts were staring me in the face. My wife was part of something dangerous, and if I didn't figure out exactly what was going on, it might be too late to stop it. I had to dig deeper. By evening, I found myself back in front of my computer, scouring the internet for any mention of the Collective. Most of the articles were vague. Underground movements like this didn't leave much of a trail. They were good at covering their tracks, but every now and then, I'd stumble on a forum post or obscure blog that hinted at their activities. Corporate sabotage, leaked documents, the occasional protests that turned violent. They claimed to be fighting against government overreach and corporate corruption, but their methods weren't exactly peaceful. And now Mia was part of it. I couldn't wrap my head around how she had gotten involved. She had never mentioned anything like this before. We used to talk about politics, sure. Everyone did, but Mia had never been an activist. She wasn't the type to march in the streets or start fires in the name of a cause. So how had she gone from the woman I knew to someone meeting in secret with dangerous people? I scrolled through more articles, my frustration growing. There wasn't much else I could find online, and my options felt limited. I could confront Mia, but I still wasn't sure what that would accomplish. She had been lying to me for months. There was no guarantee she'd tell me the truth if I asked her about this. And if I pushed too hard, she might just disappear deeper into this world she'd created for herself. But there was another option, one that made my stomach churn just thinking about it. I could follow her again. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I hated the idea of spying on my wife like this, but what other choice did I have? She wasn't giving me answers, and the longer this went on, the more dangerous it seemed. If I could figure out exactly what she was doing, maybe I could stop it before things went too far. So I made a plan. The next time she left the house, I would follow her. This time, I wouldn't just watch from a distance. I'd get closer, find out who she was meeting with, what they were planning. I needed to know everything. 2 days later, the opportunity came. It was late afternoon when Mia got dressed and headed for the door. She was wearing the same expression she always had when she left these days. Cold, distant, like she was already somewhere else in her mind. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending not to notice as she grabbed her bag and keys. "I'll be back later," she said over her shoulder, barely glancing at me. "Where are you going?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Meeting some friends," she replied, her voice too flat to be convincing. "Don't wait up." And just like that, she was gone. I grabbed my coat and followed her out the door a few minutes later, keeping a safe distance as I trailed her down the street. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline kicking in as I watched her head toward the bus stop. She didn't drive much these days, always opting for public transportation, another thing that had changed about her recently. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me, keeping her in my sights as she got on the bus. I hopped into my car and followed, sticking to the back streets, trying to blend in with traffic. I couldn't afford to lose her. After about 20 minutes, the bus pulled up near the industrial district, the same area where I'd followed her to the warehouse last time. My pulse quickened. Was she going back to meet the collective again? I parked a few blocks away and got out, keeping to the shadows as I trailed her on foot. This time, instead of heading for the warehouse, Mia walked toward a large, run-down factory building. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, graffiti covering the walls. She slipped inside through a side door, disappearing into the darkness. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure of what to do next. I had never expected it to go this far. What if there were more people inside? What if I was walking into something dangerous, something I couldn't handle on my own? But I needed answers. I couldn't stop now. I stepped through the door, keeping low and quiet as I moved through the dimly lit corridors. The place smelled of mildew and dust, the sound of dripping water echoing in the distance. Every step felt like it echoed too loud, like at any moment someone might hear me and expose what I was doing. Finally, I reached a large open room at the back of the building. I peeked around the corner, my heart racing as I spotted Mia standing in the middle of a group of people, all of them dressed in dark clothes, their faces hidden in the shadows. They were talking in low voices, too quiet for me to make out what they were saying. Mia looked tense, her arms crossed over her chest as she listened to one of the men speak. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his voice carried an air of authority. He seemed to be in charge. I crept closer, staying hidden behind a pile of old crates, straining to hear their conversation. "They're moving faster than we thought," the man was saying. "We need to accelerate the timeline." Mia nodded, her expression grim. "How soon?" "Within the next few days," the man replied. "We'll need you to deliver the data to the contact in the city. It's too risky to transfer it digitally." "Are you sure this is the right move?" Mia asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm not sure we're ready for something this big." The man stepped closer to her, his tone firm. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, they'll bury the evidence and get away with everything. You knew what you were getting into when you joined us, Mia." I could see the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation in her body language. This wasn't just a group of activists. This was something bigger, something more dangerous than I had realized. And Mia was in the middle of it. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "I'll do it." The man clapped her on the shoulder, his expression softening. "Good. We need people like you, people who aren't afraid to do what's necessary." Mia didn't respond, her face unreadable as the group continued talking in hushed voices. I couldn't hear the rest of their conversation, but it didn't matter. I had heard enough. They were planning something big, and Mia was going to be a part of it. I stayed hidden behind the crates until the group finally dispersed, each member slipping out of the building one by one. Mia lingered for a moment, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. I wanted to run to her, to tell her to stop, to come home with me and leave all of this behind. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched as she walked out of the building, disappearing into the night. When I got back home, I was a mess of emotions. Anger, fear, confusion. My wife was involved in something I couldn't even begin to understand, and she had been hiding it from me for months. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, my fingers hovering over the call button. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, but who could I call? I couldn't go to the police. I didn't even know what crime Mia was committing, if any. And what if they arrested her? What if I lost her for good? My mind was spinning in 100 different directions. I needed more information. I needed to know exactly what Mia and the collective were planning. Only then could I figure out what to do next. I didn't sleep that night. The next few days were a blur of surveillance and anxiety. Mia continued her strange behavior, leaving at odd hours, meeting with people I didn't recognize, always coming home looking more stressed than before. I followed her again, but this time I kept my distance. I didn't want to risk being caught. Instead, I focused on gathering as much information as I could. I hacked into her phone, something I never thought I'd have to do, and found encrypted messages from people I didn't know, all of them discussing plans in code. They were planning something big, and it was happening soon. But what? I couldn't figure it out. No matter how many messages I read, no matter how many conversations I overheard, I couldn't piece together the full picture. Then one night, Mia came home earlier than usual. She walked into the living room, her face pale, her hands shaking. I watched her from the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. "Miles," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped toward her, unsure of what to say. I need to tell you something." My heart was in my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. Mia stood there, her eyes wide and vulnerable, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever she was about to say, but I couldn't turn back now. I stepped toward her, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is it?" I asked, my pulse hammering in my ears. She hesitated, her hands still trembling. "There's something I've been hiding from you." I nodded, trying to appear calm. I had to let her talk, had to act like I didn't already know part of the truth. I've been involved in something," she started, her voice shaky. "Something I never intended to get this deep into." I kept quiet, waiting for her to continue, giving her space. I didn't want to push, didn't want to make her retreat. This was my chance to hear her side of the story, but I couldn't shake the image of her in that dark building, surrounded by people plotting something dangerous. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, running a hand through her hair, her eyes darting away from mine. "But I guess it's too late." I felt a pit forming in my stomach. "What are you talking about, Mia?" She took a deep breath, her eyes finally meeting mine. "There's this group. It's called The Collective. We're trying to stop something terrible from happening. It's complicated, but I didn't want to get involved at first. I swear, Miles, I didn't. But I needed something." I clenched my fists, my mind racing. She was actually admitting it, telling me about The Collective. She was finally coming clean, but the questions still hung in the air. Why? Something like what? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What are they planning? Mia's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But she didn't. She swallowed hard and looked away again, guilt etched into her features. It started small, leaking information, exposing corruption. We thought we were doing the right thing, fighting back against these companies that were destroying lives, hurting people. But then it started getting out of control. "What do you mean, out of control?" I asked, the pit in my stomach growing deeper. Mia wiped at her eyes and glanced toward the window, as if she was afraid someone might be watching us. "We've been planning something big, and now there's no turning back." I stepped closer to her, my hands shaking. "What are you talking about, Mia? What are you involved in?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if summoning the courage to speak. "They want to take down a powerful figure, someone in the government who's been covering up corporate crimes, laundering money. We're going to expose him, but it's dangerous. And there's more." I froze. "More? What do you mean?" "They're planning a full-scale operation to get the evidence. It's not just leaking documents this time. They want to make a statement, something that will make the world take notice. There's going to be a direct action. And I'm supposed to be part of it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just information being leaked. It was something bigger, something that could hurt people, something that could get Mia in serious trouble. "How far does this go, Mia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What are they planning to do?" She looked down at her feet, her voice small. "We're going to intercept a convoy, carrying sensitive documents and other assets. It's happening soon. The people we're targeting, they deserve it. They've ruined lives, covered up deaths. This will expose them for what they really are." I took a step back, my mind reeling. This was it, the thing I had feared the most. Mia wasn't just involved in a political movement. She was about to commit a crime, a dangerous one, and there was no way I could let her go through with it. "You can't do this," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Mia, you could get killed, or worse, you could end up in prison. What are you thinking? Her eyes flared with frustration. I'm thinking about all the people who have already been hurt, all the lives that have been destroyed because of the lies these companies tell, the way they manipulate the system. You don't know what it's like to see these families suffering, Miles. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I get that, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But this isn't the way, Mia. This is going too far. She shook her head, her expression hardening. Maybe for you, but for me, I have to do this. I have to make this right. I can't walk away now, not after everything I've seen. I felt my heart breaking as I looked at her, standing there with such determination in her eyes, such resolve. This wasn't the Mia I had married. This was someone else. Someone driven by something I didn't fully understand. Mia, I said, stepping closer to her, my voice softer now. You're gonna get hurt. Or worse, you're gonna hurt someone else. Do you really want that on your conscience? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned away from me, staring out the window at the darkening sky. I don't know what I want anymore, she said quietly, but I know I can't just sit around and watch this happen. I felt helpless, like the ground was slipping out from under me. No matter what I said, she wasn't going to listen. She had made up her mind, and there was no stopping her. I wanted to grab her, shake her, make her see how dangerous this was, but I knew it wouldn't work. She was too far gone. But I couldn't just let her go. I couldn't just sit back and watch her destroy her life, maybe even end up dead. There had to be a way to stop this, to protect her from herself. Mia, I said again, my voice firm this time, you don't have to do this. We can figure something out. We can expose these people another way, through the press, through legal channels. But this is going to end badly. She turned to me, her eyes hard. There's no time for that, Miles. They've been covering their tracks for years. If we don't act now, they'll bury everything, and no one will ever know the truth. This is the only way. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. So what? You're just going to risk your life for this? For people you barely know? I'm doing it for the people who have no voice, she snapped. The ones who can't fight back. This is bigger than you and me. I stared at her, my chest tightening. This was the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, and now I was watching her slip away into something I couldn't comprehend, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I can't let you do this, I said quietly, my voice breaking. I won't let you. Her face softened for a moment, and she stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. I know you don't understand, but I have to do this. I need you to trust me. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I can't, not this time. She pulled her hand away, and the moment was gone. The distance between us felt like a chasm now, one I wasn't sure we could ever bridge again. I'll be careful, she said softly, her voice hollow, but I have to go. She turned and started toward the door, and I felt panic rise in my chest. This was it. If she walked out now, there was no telling what would happen. She could get arrested, she could get hurt, or worse. I couldn't let that happen. Mia, wait, I called after her, my voice trembling. She stopped, but didn't turn around. There has to be another way. She stood there for a long moment, her back to me, and I wondered if she was thinking the same thing. If she, too, was wishing there was another way out of this, some way to stop before it was too late. But then she walked out the door, and the sound of it closing behind her felt like the final nail in the coffin. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, my mind racing. I couldn't let her do this. I couldn't let her throw her life away for something so dangerous, something that was bound to end in disaster. There had to be a way to stop her, and as the realization settled in, I knew what I had to do. I grabbed my phone and started dialing the number I never thought I'd call. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I held it, my thumb hovering over the call button. I hadn't used this contact in years, not since I left my life behind in law enforcement and started my photography career. But if there was anyone who could help me now, it was him. His number was still saved under James Emergency from a time when I thought I'd need it for something far different. He was an old friend, someone I had worked with briefly before deciding to take my life in another direction. He stayed in the system while I walked away, but we never lost touch completely. This was different, though. I had no idea how he would react when I told him what was happening. I didn't know if he would even care, but I had no other options. Mia was in too deep, and I couldn't let her go through with whatever this was. I pressed the call button and waited, the phone ringing on the other end. Every second felt like an eternity, my mind spinning with doubts. Was I really doing this? Was I about to betray my own wife? The line clicked, and his familiar voice came through. "James here." "Hey," I said, my voice a little shakier than I intended. "It's Miles." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Miles? Man, I haven't heard from you in forever. What's going on?" I swallowed hard, unsure how to even begin explaining this. "I need your help," I said, cutting to the chase. It's about Mia. I think she's in danger." Another pause, this one longer. "Danger? What kind of danger?" I could hear the skepticism in his voice, and I didn't blame him. We hadn't spoken in years, and now here I was, dropping this bombshell on him out of nowhere. "She's involved with this group," I continued, trying to find the right words. "They call themselves the Collective. It's some kind of activist group, but they're planning something big, something illegal, and I think she's about to get caught up in it." James didn't say anything for a few seconds, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was asking him to trust me, to believe me, without any solid proof. But I had no other choice. "Miles, you sure about this?" he finally asked. "I mean, this sounds intense." "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "I've been following her. I've seen the meetings. They're planning something dangerous, and it's happening soon. I need your help to stop it." James let out a long sigh, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Look, man, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm not in a position to just swoop in and stop something like this without evidence. If what you're saying is true, we need more than just suspicion. We need facts." "I have surveillance footage," I blurted out, the words tumbling out of my mouth before I could think them through. "I've been recording her. I can get you what you need." Another pause, and I could hear James processing this new information. "You've been spying on your wife?" "I didn't have a choice," I said quickly. "She was hiding something, and I needed to know what it was. I didn't realize how serious it was until now." James sighed again, and I could hear him shifting in his seat. "All right, send me what you have. I'll take a look, see if there's anything we can use. But I can't make any promises, Miles. If this is as big as you're saying, we'll need to approach it carefully." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you. I'll send it over right away." After hanging up, I sat there for a moment, the weight of what I had just done settling over me. I had made my choice. I was involving the authorities, and there was no turning back now. Mia was going to find out eventually, and when she did, I wasn't sure what would happen. But I couldn't focus on that right now. I had to stop this before it went too far. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with 1,000 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. I kept imagining Mia in handcuffs, being dragged away by the police, or worse, her getting hurt during whatever operation the Collective was planning. The thought of losing her, in any way, was unbearable. But what was I supposed to do? I couldn't just let her go through with this. I had to stop her, no matter the cost. The next morning, I woke up early, my stomach in knots. Mia was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady. I watched her for a moment, wondering how we had gotten to this point. How had we drifted so far apart that I didn't even recognize the person she had become? I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs, my phone already buzzing with a message from James. I opened it, my heart racing. "Got the footage. This is serious. I'll be in touch." I stared at the message, a mixture of relief and dread washing over me. This was it. It was happening. The wheels were in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Mia came down a little while later, looking more tired than usual. She barely said a word as she made herself a cup of coffee, her mind clearly elsewhere. I wanted to ask her what was going on, if she was having second thoughts about what she had told me the night before. But I didn't. I didn't want to push her, didn't want to risk her shutting down completely. Instead, I just watched her, my heart heavy with the knowledge that everything was about to change. Over the next couple of days, I didn't hear much from James. I tried to act normal around Mia, but the tension between us was palpable. She knew something was off, but she didn't ask, and I didn't offer any explanations. We were both walking on eggshells, waiting for the inevitable. Then one evening, I got the call. James's voice was low, serious. "We're moving in tonight." My heart stopped. "Tonight?" "Yeah," he said. "We've been tracking them for a while, but the footage you sent confirmed everything. We've got enough to move on them. It's going to happen fast, so I need you to stay out of it. Don't do anything stupid." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "What about Mia? What's going to happen to her?" "We'll do what we can," he said, his tone softer now. "But if she's involved, she's going to have to face the consequences. I'm sorry, Miles. I know this isn't what you wanted." I felt like I was going to be sick. This was it. Everything was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't stop it. Mia was going to be caught in the middle of something I had set in motion, and there was nothing I could do to protect her. "Stay home tonight," James said firmly. "Let us handle this." I nodded, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to stay away. "All right, I'll stay put." We hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, my mind racing. I couldn't just sit here and wait. I had to do something. I had to see what was going to happen. As night fell, Mia left the house again, her expression more tense than usual. She didn't say where she was going, but I already knew. This was it, the operation she had talked about, the one that could change everything. I followed her again, my heart pounding in my chest as I kept my distance. I knew James's team would be moving in soon, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Mia headed to the same warehouse district as before, but this time there was more activity. Cars lined the streets, and I could see shadowy figures moving in and out of the building. My stomach churned. This was bigger than I had imagined. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. As I got closer, I could see more clearly, people loading equipment into trucks, hushed voices giving orders. Mia was there, standing near the entrance, her face drawn and tense. I watched from a distance, my heart breaking. This was it, the moment I had feared. Then all hell broke loose. Suddenly, there were sirens, the sound of vehicles screeching to a halt, and before anyone could react, police swarmed the area, shouting orders and waving guns. The people in the warehouse scattered, but there was nowhere to go. It was a full-scale raid. I saw Mia freeze, her eyes wide with fear as officers approached her. She looked around, panic setting in, but there was no escape. I wanted to run to her, to grab her and pull her out of there, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the ground, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, but I was powerless. James had warned me not to get involved, but I couldn't just stand here and watch her get taken away. I had to do something. Before I could act, though, I saw Mia make a decision. She turned and ran. I watched her take off, her body moving faster than I'd ever seen, weaving through the crowd of people scattering in every direction. My heart raced as I saw her dart between police officers, her head down, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was just running, and in this chaos, that was the most dangerous thing she could do. "Mia!" I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the sirens and shouts. I wanted to chase after her, grab her, pull her out of the madness, but before I could make a move, I saw two officers spot her. They took off after her, barking orders for her to stop. She didn't. Mia kept running, her desperation evident in the way she moved, her steps frantic, stumbling. My legs finally moved, propelling me forward. I didn't care about staying hidden anymore. I didn't care about what was going to happen to me. All I knew was that I had to get to her before they did. I sprinted after her, pushing my way through the chaos, dodging police and panicked members of the collective alike. "Mia!" I screamed again, my voice hoarse, but she didn't turn around. She was too far ahead, too deep into her own fear. I saw her turn a corner, disappearing into the narrow alley between two warehouses. The two officers chasing her were close behind, their radios crackling with updates. I pushed harder, my chest burning, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. As I rounded the corner into the alley, I saw Mia again. She was trapped. The alley was a dead end, blocked off by a tall chain-link fence. She stood there, breathing hard, looking for a way out, but there wasn't one. The two officers slowed their pace as they approached her, their guns drawn but not raised. They were shouting at her to put her hands up, to stop, to surrender, but she didn't move. She stood there, staring at the fence, her back to them, her back to me, like she was contemplating her next move. My heart felt like it was going to explode. This was it. If she made the wrong decision now, if she tried to fight or run again, it was all over. "Mia, stop," I yelled, my voice cracking with desperation. "Please, just stop." She finally turned her head, her eyes locking onto mine. I saw the fear in them, the confusion, the raw panic. But there was something else too, something darker. It was the look of someone who had gone too far and didn't know how to come back. I took a step forward, my hands raised. "Please, Mia, it's over. You don't have to run anymore. Just stop." The officers were still shouting at her, but I could see the uncertainty on their faces. They didn't want to hurt her, but they would if she gave them no choice. For a moment, everything was still. Time seemed to slow as Mia looked at me, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the battle between fight and flight, between survival and surrender. And then, finally, she let out a long, shaky breath and dropped to her knees. The officers rushed forward, grabbing her arms, pulling her hands behind her back as they cuffed her. Mia didn't resist. She didn't say a word. She just stared at the ground, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, watching as the woman I loved was taken away in handcuffs. As the officers pulled her to her feet and began leading her out of the alley, Mia finally looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The look on her face said everything. This was the end. The next few hours were a blur. I stood there in the alley long after they had taken her away, my mind racing, my body numb. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, like something that couldn't possibly be real. But it was. Mia was gone, and there was nothing I could do to change that. Eventually, I made my way back to my car, driving home in a daze. The house felt empty, colder than it had ever felt before. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where she usually sat, her absence weighing heavily on my chest. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know who to call, or how to help her, or if I even could. Everything was out of my hands now. All I could do was wait. Wait and hope that somehow, some way, things would work out. The next morning, I got a call from James. "Miles, we've got her in custody," he said, his voice businesslike but not unkind. "She's being processed now. It's not good." I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means she's facing some serious charges. Conspiracy, resisting arrest, association with a terrorist group. It's not just a slap on the wrist. She could be looking at serious time. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known this was a possibility, but hearing it out loud made it real. Mia wasn't just in trouble. She was in real danger of losing everything. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James sighed on the other end of the line. "Not much, man. It's in the system's hands now. The best thing you can do is get her a good lawyer, someone who can fight for her. But I'll be honest, it's not going to be easy." I thanked him and hung up, feeling completely and utterly helpless. I wanted to scream, to break something, to somehow rewind time and stop all of this from happening. But I couldn't. I had made my choices, and so had Mia. Now we had to live with the consequences. The next few weeks were a blur of court dates, meetings with lawyers, and sleepless nights. Mia was held without bail, and every time I saw her in that courtroom, dressed in a prison uniform, my heart broke a little more. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew, her eyes hollow, her spirit crushed. But there was also a kind of resolve in her, a quiet determination that told me she had accepted her fate. I visited her whenever I could, but our conversations were short, stilted. There was so much we needed to say, but neither of us knew where to start. I wanted to ask her why, to make her explain how we had gotten here, but I was afraid of the answer. And I think she was too. One afternoon, a few weeks into the trial, I finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting me since the night of her arrest. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice quiet as we sat across from each other in the visitation room. "Why did you get involved with them?" Mia stared at the table for a long time before answering. "I don't know," she said softly. "At first, it was just about feeling like I was making a difference, like I was doing something that mattered. But then, it got out of control, and by the time I realized how far in I was, it was too late." I nodded, trying to understand, but it was hard. I had never seen Mia as the kind of person who would get swept up in something like this, but maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe I had never really seen her at all. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I know, and I'm sorry, too." We sat there in silence for a long time, holding hands, both of us lost in our own thoughts. There was so much I wanted to say, but none of it felt like enough. The damage had been done, and now we were both paying the price. A few weeks later, the trial came to an end. Mia was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was still a devastating blow. I stood there in the courtroom as they led her away, my heart breaking all over again. I visited her as much as I could in the months that followed, but things between us were never the same. There was too much distance, too much pain. Mia had changed, and so had I. We were two different people now, and no amount of visits or letters could bridge the gap between us. Eventually, we stopped talking. It wasn't a conscious decision, it just happened. The calls became less frequent, the visits more strained, until one day they stopped altogether. I still loved her, but the woman I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone I didn't know anymore. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. One night, months after our last conversation, I sat alone in our house, staring at the photos on the wall. Pictures of me and Mia, smiling and happy, from a time that felt like a lifetime ago. I wondered how things might have been different if I had seen the signs earlier, if I had done more to save her before it was too late. But I knew it didn't matter. The past was done, and there was no changing it. No amount of reflection or regret would bring back the life we once had. I had spent so many sleepless nights thinking about what went wrong, how Mia and I had ended up on opposite sides of something so destructive. But the truth was, it wasn't just one thing. It was a series of small moments, cracks that grew into fissures, until one day, everything collapsed. I had stopped going through the surveillance footage a long time ago, but that night, I felt drawn to it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was some desperate need for closure. I sat down at my laptop, pulling up the old files. There was nothing new to discover, but I wanted to relive the steps that had led us here. I wanted to understand Mia's descent into this life I had never known existed. The footage played out in the dim light of the living room. It started with the small, subtle changes, her leaving at odd hours, her distant expressions, the long phone calls she never explained. As the weeks passed, the meetings with the collective began, and I watched as she became someone else. I watched her cross the line from frustration with the world's injustices to full-blown involvement in something criminal. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I had lost her. I paused the video, staring at Mia's face on the screen. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She was tense, focused, her eyes hard and determined. That wasn't the Mia I knew, but maybe that was the point. Maybe I never truly understood her. I closed the laptop, feeling a deep, heavy sadness settle over me. The kind of sadness that came from knowing that you couldn't change the past, no matter how much you wanted to. I could sit here all night, replaying those moments, trying to figure out where I went wrong, but it wouldn't matter. The damage was done. The house felt too quiet without her, too still. I missed the sound of her laugh, the way she filled every room with her presence. I missed the version of us that had existed before all of this. But that version was long gone, and I had to face the reality of what was left. Months turned into a year. Life went on, even when it felt like it shouldn't. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the gaping hole Mia's absence had left in my life. Photography became my escape, capturing moments that felt real and tangible, unlike the chaos of the past year. But even as I tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Mia had been eligible for parole after 3 years, and though I hadn't visited her much in the final year of her sentence, I still followed her case closely. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to see if there was any way to salvage what had been broken. But the other part, the more honest part, knew that we had both changed too much for that to happen. When I got the call that she had been granted parole, I didn't know how to feel. Relief, maybe. Sadness, definitely. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of finality, like the last page of a chapter had been turned and there was no going back. I wasn't there when she was released. I didn't go to the prison to meet her. I had thought about it, had pictured what that moment might be like. But in the end, I stayed away. It wasn't my place anymore. Mia needed to figure out who she was outside of all this, just like I did. And I couldn't do that for her. A few weeks later, I got a letter from her. It was short, just a few sentences, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. I wanted to thank you for everything. I know we went through hell, and I know I hurt you in ways I'll never be able to fix. But I need you to know that I don't blame you. None of this was your fault. It was my choice, my mistakes. I don't know where I'm going next, but I think it's time for me to find out who I am outside of all of this, outside of the mistakes and the guilt. I hope you're able to do the same. I'll always love you for the time we shared. Please take care of yourself. Mia, I sat there for a long time after reading the letter, the words sinking in. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that from her, how much I had been carrying the weight of our mistakes. But now, with her words in front of me, I felt something lift. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was something close. It was closure. In the months that followed, I thought less and less about Mia. I focused on myself, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that had been fractured during the years we were apart. I traveled more, throwing myself into photography projects that took me all over the world. The more I focused on my work, the more I found pieces of myself that I had lost during the chaos of the past few years. But every once in a while, I would think of her, wonder where she was, what she was doing. I hoped she had found some semblance of peace, some way to make sense of everything that had happened. I hoped she had found a way to forgive herself. One day, I got an email from a mutual friend who had heard from Mia. She was living in a small town, far from the city, working with a nonprofit that helped at-risk youth. I smiled when I read that, feeling a sense of pride for her. She had found her way out. She had taken the pain and the mistakes and turned them into something good. That's who Mia had always been, at her core. Someone who wanted to help, to fix what was broken. It just took her a while to figure out how to do it in a way that wouldn't destroy her. I never saw Mia again after that. We didn't keep in touch, but that was okay. Some relationships weren't meant to last forever, but that didn't mean they weren't important. Mia had been a part of my life, and I had been a part of hers. We had shared love and heartbreak, and in the end, we had both found a way to move on. As time passed, the memories of those years faded. The anger and the hurt were replaced by acceptance, and eventually by peace. I had no regrets. I had done everything I could to save her, but in the end, it wasn't up to me. Mia had to save herself, and she had. And as for me, I learned how to live again. I found joy in the small moments, in the quiet beauty of the world around me. Life had a way of surprising you, of healing wounds you thought would never close. And while Mia was a part of my past, she wasn't my future. I took one last look at the photos on the wall before taking them down, packing them away in a box. It was time to move forward. Time to let go. As I stood in the doorway, ready to close the chapter for good, I smiled to myself, knowing that somehow, despite everything, I was going to be okay. I spent the rest of the night researching the symbol and the name. It took hours, but I eventually found a few obscure articles about an underground group called The Collective. They were activists, or so they claimed. But their methods were extreme: sabotage, data leaks, exposing corporate corruption by any means necessary. Some called them terrorists, others freedom fighters. Either way, they were dangerous, and Mia was involved with them. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of the discovery crushed me, making it hard to breathe. Mia had never mentioned anything like this before. We used to talk about everything: our dreams, our fears, our plans for the future. But now it felt like I didn't even know her. I thought about confronting her, but what would I say? How would I explain how I knew? And if she was willing to lie about this, what else was she hiding? By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what Mia was involved in before I could confront her. I wasn't just dealing with an affair. This was something bigger, something dangerous, and I had to find out the truth.